The courtroom was quiet, except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It was an ordinary day in Judge Richard Holloway's court, or so it seemed. The judge sat at his bench, his expression one of practiced indifference, as he flipped through some papers. In front of him stood Maya Johnson, a young black woman with her hair neatly tied back and a folder clutched tightly in her hands. She looked calm on the surface, but her knuckles were white from gripping the folder too hard. This was her first time appearing in court, and she had spent countless nights preparing for this moment. Maya wasn't a lawyer. She couldn't afford one. But she knew her case inside out. She had been wrongfully fired from her job after reporting discriminatory practices at her workplace. Her employer claimed it was due to performance issues, but Maya knew better. She had evidence, emails, performance reviews, and even accounts from coworkers who had witnessed the unfair treatment. Still, standing there in the cold, formal setting of the courtroom, she couldn't help but feel small. Judge Holloway glanced up from his papers and gave her a quick once-over. He had seen plenty of people like her before, individuals without legal representation, trying to fight battles they didn't fully understand. To him, these cases often ended the same way, dismissed or ruled against. With a slight smirk, he leaned back in his chair and addressed her. "Ms. Johnson, is it?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Do you have any experience with court procedures? Because I'm afraid this isn't exactly Judge Judy." A few people in the gallery chuckled nervously at his comment. Maya felt her cheeks grow warm, but she nodded firmly. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady, despite the knot forming in her stomach. "I've done my best to prepare." "Oh, I'm sure you have," Judge Holloway said, raising an eyebrow. He gestured toward the thick stack of documents in her hands. "But preparation doesn't always mean readiness. Let's see if you can keep up, shall we?" It was clear that the judge wasn't taking her seriously. His dismissive attitude hung heavy in the air, making Maya feel like an outsider in a world where she already faced enough barriers. But deep down, she refused to let his words break her spirit. She reminded herself why she was here, not just for herself, but for others who had been treated unfairly and silenced. As the proceedings began, Maya fumbled slightly while explaining her case. Legal jargon tripped her up, and she struggled to find the right words. Each misstep brought another smirk from Judge Holloway, who seemed more entertained than concerned about justice being served. "Take your time, Ms. Johnson," he said mockingly. "We wouldn't want to rush such important matters." Despite the growing tension, Maya took a deep breath. She reminded herself of all the late nights she'd spent researching laws and building her case. She thought about her children, who depended on her, and the countless others who might benefit if she succeeded. Slowly, her nervousness began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. Little did Judge Holloway know, he was about to witness something extraordinary, a display of intelligence and resilience that would leave him stunned. The courtroom remained silent, save for the faint rustle of papers as Maya tried to steady herself. Judge Holloway's smirk lingered on his face, and it was clear he had already made up his mind about her. To him, this was just another case where someone without legal training would stumble through their arguments, only to leave defeated. He leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on his hand, clearly expecting the worst. "All right, Ms. Johnson," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Let's hear what you've got. Impress me." Maya took a deep breath, clutching her folder a little tighter. She glanced down at her notes, organizing her thoughts one last time before speaking. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I'm here today because I believe my rights were violated when I was wrongfully terminated from my job." She paused briefly, making sure to look directly at the judge. "I have evidence that shows my employer engaged in discriminatory practices, including unequal treatment based on race and gender." Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Evidence," he repeated, almost mockingly. "Let's see it then. But remember, Ms. Johnson, evidence isn't just a stack of papers or hearsay. It needs to hold up under scrutiny." Maya nodded and opened her folder, pulling out a series of documents. She laid them on the table in front of her, taking care to keep everything organized. "These are emails exchanged between my manager and HR," she explained, pointing to specific sections. "They discuss my performance reviews, which consistently rated me as exceeding expectations. Yet, shortly after I reported instances of discrimination, I was suddenly labeled as underperforming." The judge leaned back again, crossing his arms over his chest. "And you expect me to believe that your employer decided to fire you solely based on these emails?" he asked skeptically. "It sounds like speculation to me." "It's not speculation, Your Honor," Maya replied, her voice growing stronger. She pulled out additional documents, performance evaluations, attendance records, and even written commendations from clients. "If you compare these records with the reasons given for my termination, you'll see there's no justification for their actions. They targeted me because I spoke up." At this point, the defense attorney, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, stood up to object. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant," he interjected smoothly. "My client has followed all proper protocols regarding employee conduct and termination. Ms. Johnson is simply trying to muddy the waters with unrelated information." Judge Holloway nodded approvingly at the attorney, turning his attention back to Maya. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his tone laced with mockery, "you're going to need more than just a few documents to prove your case. Do you even know how to argue a motion or cite precedents? Or are we just winging it here?" The gallery murmured quietly, some people shaking their heads in sympathy for Maya, while others seemed amused by the spectacle. Maya, however, didn't flinch. She squared her shoulders and looked the judge straight in the eye. "With respect, Your Honor, I may not be a lawyer, but I've done my homework. For example, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits employers from retaliating against employees who report discrimination. My case fits squarely within that framework." For a brief moment, Judge Holloway's expression faltered. He hadn't expected her to reference actual laws, let alone do so confidently. Still, he wasn't ready to give her credit just yet. Well, he said, forcing a chuckle. "Looks like we got ourselves a quick study. But knowing a law doesn't make you a legal expert, does it?" Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her folder and pulled out photocopies of court rulings from similar cases. "Here are examples of cases where courts ruled in favor of employees facing retaliation," she said, placing them carefully on the table. "I've highlighted the key points that apply to my situation. If you'd like, I can explain how they're relevant." The judge's smirk faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps irritation. He glanced at the documents, then back at Maya, who stood tall despite the odds stacked against her. For the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as unprepared as he'd assumed. The courtroom grew quieter, the tension palpable, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. As the courtroom settled into an uneasy silence, Judge Holloway stared at the documents Maya had placed on the table. For a moment, he seemed unsure of how to proceed. His earlier mockery was beginning to waver, replaced by a flicker of doubt. This wasn't what he had anticipated. A self-represented plaintiff who not only knew her rights, but could back them up with legal references and real evidence. Maya took advantage of the pause to gather herself. She could feel the weight of the room's attention pressing down on her, but she refused to let it shake her confidence. Taking another deep breath, she decided it was time to reveal more about who she truly was. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I understand why you might assume I don't belong here. Many people have underestimated me before, often because of how I look or where I come from. But I want to assure you that I'm not just someone fighting blindly. I've prepared for this." The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Go on," he said, his tone less dismissive now. Maya nodded and continued. "Before life took a different turn, I graduated at the top of my class from law school. I worked hard, really hard, to get there, even though I didn't have the same opportunities as many of my peers. But after graduation, things got complicated. Financial struggles, personal responsibilities, they all piled up. I couldn't afford the fees to take the bar exam multiple times, so I had to step away from pursuing a career in law. Her voice softened slightly as she spoke, but there was no trace of self-pity, only determination. Still, I never stopped learning. Law has always been my passion, and over the years, I've kept studying, kept reading, and kept preparing for moments like this. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some people exchanged surprised glances, while others leaned forward, eager to hear more. Even the defense attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Judge Holloway, however, remained silent, his expression unreadable. He gestured for Maya to continue. "So, Ms. Johnson," he said slowly, "you're telling me you have legal training. Why should that matter if you're not licensed to practice?" "It matters because knowledge is power," Maya replied without hesitation, "and because I know the system well enough to see when it's being misused. My employer thought they could push me aside because I'm a black woman, because I don't have connections or resources. But they underestimated me, just like you did, Your Honor. And today, I'm here to prove that no one, not my employer, not anyone, can silence me." Her word hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. The judge sat back in his chair, his earlier amusement completely gone. There was something undeniable about Maya's presence now, a quiet strength that commanded respect. It was as if the entire courtroom had shifted, tilting in her favor. To demonstrate her point, Maya turned to address the defense attorney directly. "You mentioned earlier that my claims are irrelevant," she said, pointing toward him. "But according to case law, including the ruling in McDonnell Douglas Corp. v. Green, once an employee establishes a prima facie case of discrimination, the burden shifts to the employer to provide a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason for their actions. Can your client provide such proof?" The defense attorney hesitated, caught off guard by both her directness and her command of legal terminology. "That's a matter for discussion," he stammered, clearly flustered. Maya pressed on. "Exactly. And until they can do so convincingly, my claim stands strong." The judge watched the exchange closely, his skepticism giving way to reluctant admiration. He couldn't deny that Maya was holding her own, and doing it exceptionally well. What started as a routine hearing was quickly turning into something extraordinary. A clash of wills, intellect, and justice. For the first time since the trial began, Judge Holloway found himself genuinely curious about how this would unfold. He glanced at Maya, then at the defense team, before finally addressing the court. "Let's proceed," he said simply, his tone neutral but tinged with newfound seriousness. Whatever doubts he had about Maya were fading fast, replaced by a growing realization that she was far more than she appeared to be. The courtroom was now fully alive with tension, every eye fixed on Maya, as she continued to dismantle the defense's arguments piece by piece. Judge Holloway, who had started the day expecting a quick and predictable outcome, found himself leaning forward in his chair, his pen moving steadily across the notepad in front of him. The dismissive smirk that had once dominated his face was long gone, replaced by an expression of cautious curiosity. For the first time in years, he wasn't just presiding over a case. He was watching something remarkable unfold. Maya, sensing the shift in energy, pressed her advantage. She turned back to the judge, her voice calm but authoritative. "Your Honor," she began, "I'd like to introduce additional evidence that further supports my claim." With careful precision, she handed copies of internal company memos to the bailiff, who passed them along to the judge and the defense attorney. These documents show a pattern of behavior within the company, specifically how employees of color were consistently overlooked for promotions or given unfavorable assignments compared to their white counterparts. The defense attorney, visibly rattled, stood up to object. "Your Honor, these documents are irrelevant and prejudicial," he argued, though his usual confidence seemed to have evaporated. "They don't directly pertain to Ms. Johnson's termination." But Maya was ready for him. Actually, they do, she countered, her tone firm yet respectful. These memos highlight the systemic discrimination embedded in the company culture, a culture that ultimately led to my wrongful termination. When I reported these practices, I became a target. That's retaliation, plain and simple. Judge Holloway paused, flipping through the memos, his brow furrowed as he read, clearly troubled by what he saw. Though he tried to maintain his neutral demeanor, it was obvious that Maya's arguments were striking a chord. He glanced at the defense attorney. "Counsel, does your client dispute the authenticity of these documents?" The attorney hesitated, fumbling through the pages. "We will need time to review them thoroughly, Your Honor," he finally managed, avoiding eye contact. "That won't be necessary right now," Maya interjected smoothly. "If opposing counsel needs more time, I'm happy to accommodate. But let's not lose sight of the bigger picture here. These memos aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a larger pattern. And if you look closely, you'll see references to specific employees, including myself." The judge nodded thoughtfully, jotting down another note. "Ms. Johnson raises valid points," he said, addressing the defense attorney. "You'll have an opportunity to respond later, but for now, let's proceed." Encouraged by the judge's receptiveness, Maya moved on to her next piece of evidence: testimonies from former coworkers. She called upon Sarah Chen, a former colleague who had agreed to testify on her behalf. As Sarah took the stand, Maya guided her through a series of questions designed to paint a vivid picture of the hostile work environment she had endured. Sarah spoke candidly about the racial slurs whispered in hallways, the unequal distribution of responsibilities, and the chilling atmosphere of fear that kept employees silent. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine Sarah, their attempts to discredit her fell flat. Every question they posed was met with clear, concise answers that reinforced Maya's narrative. By the time Sarah stepped down, even the gallery seemed convinced that something deeply unfair had occurred. Maya then shifted gears, focusing on the financial impact of her termination. She presented pay stubs, tax records, and medical bills, showing how her sudden loss of income had affected not only her but also her children. Her voice softened briefly as she described the sacrifices she made to provide for her family, painting a relatable portrait of struggle and resilience. By this point, Judge Holloway was no longer merely listening. He was captivated. His earlier mockery had transformed into genuine interest and perhaps even admiration. It was becoming increasingly clear that Maya wasn't just fighting for herself. She was exposing a broken system that needed to be held accountable. As the hearing drew to a close for the day, the judge announced a short recess before final statements. Maya returned to her seat, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She knew she had done everything she could to present her case, and she could tell that the tide was turning in her favor. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: she had already proven that intelligence, preparation, and courage could overcome even the most daunting odds. The courtroom was eerily quiet as Judge Holloway prepared to deliver his verdict. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, anticipation hanging thick in the air. Maya sat at her table, her hands clasped tightly together, her face a mask of calm determination. She had done everything she could, presented her evidence, cited laws, and exposed the truth about the discrimination she endured. Now, all that was left was to hear the judge's decision. Judge Holloway cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he scanned his notes one last time. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if weighing not just the facts of the case, but the broader implications of what he had witnessed over the past few days. Finally, he looked up, his expression serious and deliberate. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice steady and measured, "when this trial began, I admit I had certain assumptions about your ability to present a coherent legal argument." He paused, glancing briefly at Maya before continuing. "I regret to say that those assumptions were misplaced, and perhaps unfair. You have demonstrated not only an impressive understanding of the law, but also a level of preparation and resilience that many licensed attorneys would struggle to match. A murmur rippled through the gallery, some people nodding in agreement while others exchanged surprised looks. Maya felt a lump rise in her throat, but she remained composed, meeting the judge's gaze with quiet strength. In light of the evidence presented, Judge Holloway continued, "I find in favor of Ms. Johnson. The defendant is ordered to pay damages for wrongful termination and emotional distress, as well as punitive damages to address the discriminatory practices uncovered during this trial. Furthermore, I am instructing the company to implement comprehensive reforms, including mandatory anti-discrimination training and regular audits of their hiring and promotion processes." The words hit like a wave, washing away the tension that had filled the room. Maya exhaled deeply, tears welling up in her eyes but refusing to fall. She had won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced or dismissed because of their race, gender, or background. As the gallery erupted into quiet applause, Judge Holloway added one final remark. "Ms. Johnson, I want to personally commend you for your courage and tenacity. Too often, people in positions of power, including judges like myself, fail to recognize the potential in those who stand before us. Today, you reminded me why it's so important to listen carefully and judge fairly. Thank you for that lesson." Maya stood slowly, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and gratitude. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't just my victory. It's a step toward ensuring that no one else has to go through what I did." Outside the courtroom, reporters were waiting eagerly, microphones in hand. Word of Maya's remarkable performance had spread quickly, drawing attention from local news outlets and even national media. As she stepped into the hallway, flashes of cameras went off, and questions came flying at her from every direction. "How does it feel to win?" one reporter asked. "What's next for you?" another chimed in. Maya took a moment to gather her thoughts before addressing the crowd. "Today's victory isn't just about me," she said, her voice strong and clear despite the chaos around her. "It's about proving that when we stand up for ourselves and fight for what's right, change is possible. I hope my story inspires others to believe in their own strength and speak out against injustice, no matter how hard it may seem." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of approval from the crowd. Offers began pouring in almost immediately, from law firms wanting to hire her to advocacy groups seeking her expertise in fighting workplace inequality. But Maya knew she wasn't ready to dive back into the world of formal law just yet. Instead, she decided to channel her energy into helping others navigate the challenges she had faced. In the weeks that followed, Maya became a symbol of perseverance and justice. Her story was featured in newspapers, magazines, and TV interviews, shining a spotlight on systemic discrimination and the importance of standing up against it. Judge Holloway, too, underwent a transformation of sorts. Inspired by Maya's determination, he began advocating for changes within the court system, pushing for greater support and resources for individuals representing themselves in legal matters. Though the road ahead would still hold its share of challenges, Maya walked away from the courthouse that day knowing she had made a difference, not just in her own life, but in the lives of countless others who might now see a path forward where none seemed to exist before. In the days and weeks following her courtroom victory, Maya Johnson's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. What started as a personal battle for justice had grown into something much bigger, a movement that resonated with people across the country. Her story wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about resilience, determination, and proving that ordinary individuals could challenge powerful systems and win. The media coverage of her case brought an outpouring of support from all corners. Messages flooded her inbox, emails, letters, even phone calls, from people who saw themselves in Maya's struggle. Many shared their own stories of discrimination and injustice, thanking her for giving them hope. "You've shown us that we can fight back," one message read. "Thank you for reminding me that my voice matters." Another wrote, "I've been afraid to speak up, but your courage has inspired me to take a stand." Maya knew she couldn't let this momentum fade. She decided to use her newfound platform to help others facing similar challenges. With the financial settlement from her case, she founded a nonprofit organization called Pathways to Justice. The mission was simple yet profound: to empower marginalized individuals by providing them with the tools and resources they needed to navigate the legal system. Whether it was offering free workshops on employment rights, connecting people with pro bono lawyers, or creating online guides for self-represented litigants, Maya poured her heart into making sure no one had to face the same struggles alone. Her work quickly gained traction. Community centers invited her to speak at events, sharing her story and offering practical advice to those seeking justice. Local schools asked her to mentor students interested in law, particularly young women and minorities who often felt discouraged from pursuing such careers. Maya became a beacon of inspiration, not because of what she had achieved, but because of how she used her success to uplift others. Even Judge Holloway, whose initial mockery had stung so deeply, reached out to express his admiration. In a letter addressed to Maya, he wrote, "Your strength and intelligence reminded me why I chose to become a judge: to serve justice, not perpetuate bias. You've inspired me to rethink how we treat individuals without legal representation and push for reforms that make our courts more accessible to everyone." Maya appreciated the gesture, seeing it as proof that growth and change were possible, even in unlikely places. She accepted his apology graciously, recognizing that true progress often required forgiveness and collaboration. Together, they began working on initiatives to improve court procedures for pro se litigants, ensuring that future cases like hers wouldn't be dismissed simply because someone lacked formal training. As word of her advocacy spread, opportunities came knocking. Law firms offered her positions, urging her to finally take the bar exam and join their ranks. While Maya considered the idea, she felt her purpose lay elsewhere, at least for now. "I'm not done helping people find their voices," she told a reporter during an interview. "There's still so much work to be done." Her children watched proudly as their mother became a role model, not just for them, but for countless others. They saw firsthand the power of perseverance and integrity, lessons that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Friends and family rallied around her, celebrating her achievements while supporting her new mission. By the end of the year, Pathways to Justice had helped dozens of individuals file complaints, prepare cases, and secure victories against discriminatory practices. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, frustrations, and moments when Maya doubted herself. But every success reaffirmed her belief in the importance of her work. And though the road ahead remained long, Maya walked it with unwavering resolve. She had proven that one person's courage could spark meaningful change, and that was a legacy worth fighting for. Years passed, and Maya Johnson's name became synonymous with resilience, justice, and empowerment. Her nonprofit organization, Pathways to Justice, had grown far beyond what she ever imagined. What started as a small initiative in her living room now operated out of a bustling office downtown, with a team of volunteers, legal experts, and social workers dedicated to helping those who felt voiceless fight for their rights. The organization had assisted hundreds of individuals, some facing workplace discrimination, others battling housing inequality or unfair treatment in schools, and each victory fueled Maya's determination to keep pushing forward. But Maya's journey wasn't just about the people she helped, it was also about her own growth. Inspired by the countless stories she encountered through her work, she finally decided to take the bar exam, a goal that had lingered in the back of her mind for years. Balancing late-night study sessions with raising her children and running her nonprofit was no easy feat, but Maya approached it with the same grit and focus that had carried her through her wrongful termination case. When she received her passing score, tears streamed down her face, not just for herself, but for everyone who had doubted they could achieve their dreams against all odds. Her achievement made headlines once again, and this time, Judge Richard Holloway personally attended her swearing-in ceremony. Standing before a room filled with friends, family, and supporters, Maya delivered a heartfelt speech. "This moment isn't just mine," she said, her voice steady yet emotional. "It belongs to every person who has ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or strong enough. If I can stand here today, so can you." Judge Holloway approached her after the ceremony, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Ms. Johnson, or should I say Attorney Johnson, you've come a long way since that day in my courtroom. You didn't just earn my respect. You changed how I see the world. Thank you for reminding me why I chose this profession. To serve justice, not assumptions." His words carried genuine admiration, a far cry from the dismissiveness he had shown years earlier. With her law license in hand, Maya expanded pathways to justice even further. She partnered with local universities to create scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing careers in law. She advocated for policy changes at both state and federal levels, working tirelessly to address systemic inequalities in the legal system. And perhaps most importantly, she continued mentoring young people, showing them that success wasn't defined by where you started, but by how hard you were willing to work to get where you wanted to go. Maya's impact reached far beyond the courtroom. She became a sought-after speaker, traveling across the country to share her story and inspire others to believe in their potential. At one event, a young black girl approached her after the talk, clutching a notebook filled with scribbled notes. "I want to be a lawyer like you someday," the girl said shyly. Maya knelt down to meet her at eye level, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You already have everything you need inside you," she replied. "Just don't give up, no matter what anyone says." As the years went on, Maya reflected on how far she'd come, from being underestimated in a courtroom to becoming a symbol of hope and change. Her journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge had shaped her into the person she was meant to be. She often thought about that first day in Judge Holloway's court, the doubt, the fear, the quiet determination that refused to let her back down. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories. In the end, Maya's legacy wasn't just about winning cases or earning titles. It was about proving that courage, knowledge, and perseverance could overcome even the toughest obstacles. She had turned pain into purpose, transforming not only her own life, but the lives of countless others along the way. And though her work was far from over, she faced the future with unwavering hope, knowing that true justice began when people believed in themselves and each other.